let's return to the biggest political story of the month so far, the unprecedented revelations. Former Prime Minister Scott Morrison took control of 5 ministerial portfolios between March 2020 and May 2021. Let's dissect what all of this means. I'm joined now at the desk by Sky Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew, welcome. This has been a constant drip of revelations. What I can't understand, though, is why the secrecy?
Oh, it just doesn't make any sense at all. It just seems like bizarre behaviour by the former PM. And to not tell his cabinet colleagues or not tell the public is unprecedented. You can't imagine John Howard secretly swearing himself in as Treasurer without Peter Costello knowing, or Bob Hawke doing it to Paul Keating. It's kind of, it looks underhand. Now, maybe Scott Morrison's of the belief, as he sort of said this morning, that he thought his colleagues knew. That's not what they're telling journalists. The only one who knew apparently was Greg Hunt. I could see him wanting to avoid the conversation with Matthias Cormann. And I could see the rationale for the action at the height of the pandemic. I mean, recall that March 2020, we didn't know what was going to happen. We thought we all could die, you know. So to have that in place, sworn in case, maybe fair enough. And Peter Dutton had been struck down, I think, around that time with COVID and was pretty ill. But then he does it a year later with Treasurer, 5 days before the budget. He does it with the Home Affairs portfolio. He does it with the Industry, Energy and Resources portfolio without the Energy Minister knowing and without the Resources Minister knowing for some time, so he can make a decision on a project.
And that's where it gets sinister, the word used by Malcolm Turnbull last week. That's where it gets sinister. It's been served on a platter for Anthony Albanese here.
That's right.
And he's taken it and run with it. And it's fair to do that, but he's got to get on with leading. I like what Peter Dutton said today.
I think that's right.
Well, hang on a second. People are talking about cost of living. Not necessarily will they talk about this story, Scott Morrison's story, in a couple of days' time.
The funny thing about this is when you say served on a platter, that's so accurate, because normally what happens is the new government comes in, they dig around to find any dirt they can, the departments, and then they throw it out there. This time a book's come out revealing about health and finance, and then leaks have started on the other material.
How does he walk into the caucus room in the middle of October?
I don't know if he can. Well, actually, it'll be early September. That's when Parliament next sits.
Right.
So he's sort of saying, I want to stay member for Cook. But Karen Andrews was the Home Affairs Minister. She's close to Stuart Robert, one of Scott Morrison's closest friends in the Parliament. She says he should resign. I'm not sure how tenable his position is. Look, they'll just... Peter Dutton's made clear he's not going to be forced out or anything like that. He's a former Prime Minister.
One scandal to another, to New South Wales again, and the report into John Barilaro's New York Trade Commissioner role. The New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet released an independent report today. We're going to see a tightening of rules around former ministers applying for jobs in the public sector. Senior public servants will need to seek ethics advice in relation to their future employment, and such advice will be made public. Trade roles that will be appointed through the Government Sector Employment Act to provide more transparency. Here was the Premier handing down the report today.
Mr Barilaro has applied for the job. As he has said in his evidence that he provided, he was not to know of the flawed process that has been in place. No one, no minister knew of the flawed process that was in place. But what we have to do is take responsibility for what has occurred and make the requisite changes to ensure this doesn't happen again.
So all the procedures are wrong, but no damning evidence or no damning findings against John Barilaro or even the Premier.
What a surprise. I mean, it was the Premier's department who commissioned the inquiry. I say don't commission an inquiry unless you know the answer. Well, call me cynical, but they recommend no ex-minister or whatever can go for these sorts of jobs for 18 months. Well, that was common sense in the first place, and that's what Dominic Perrottet should have said to John Barilaro when he told him, seeking his permission effectively in Martin Place, I'm going to apply for this job. Perrottet's made a big mistake here.
And so has Matt Keane and so has Stuart Ayres, who are all privy to what John Barilaro is doing.
I agree.
Ahead of the November election, the Andrews government is refusing to release reports into responses recorded from the public about the state's harsh lockdowns. He's a magician, Daniel Andrews. He can just refuse to provide documents or provide transparency, and yet the polls keep saying he'll steamroll in at the next election.
What I hear about Victoria is that there might be a shift away from both major parties, but that Dan Andrews will romp an inch. But I also think Andrews benefits from the godlike status that premiers got through the pandemic.
Yeah.
Think McGowan, think Gladys, think even Palaszczuk, and he's kind of in that boat. So there's a lot of pandemic benefit to what's going to happen in November, just because they got promoted with that daily press conference that, you know, they were trying to keep citizens safe.
Save the world. Andrew Clennell, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Chris.